Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are diving into autism. And what if I told you the key to understanding human development isn't in a doctor's office at all?
Right. It's actually found by tracking where a kid looks at a brightly colored balloon down to the millisecond.
Exactly. Or like taking a single skin cell and just reversing it in time to grow a microscopic, personalized, living brain.
It sounds like sci-fi, but the science we're looking at today truly feels like we've crossed this massive threshold.
Yeah, we really have.
We are totally moving past that old era of behavioral guesswork and entering this period of incredible biological precision.
And for you listening right now, that is our mission today. You probably already know the basics of what autism is. You've heard the terms.
Sure, everyone has heard the terms.
But our stack of sources today is pulling from brand new, like 2025 and 2026 scientific research. And we're pairing that with these incredibly detailed guides straight from the autistic community to explore the how and the why.
Which is so important because we aren't just going to rehash old medical definitions here.
No, definitely not. We're looking at the actual mechanics of this neurodivergent operating system. We're talking about the physical scaffolding of the brain.
Yeah, and we have to talk about the massive and sometimes really controversial gap between what scientists are actually funding and what autistic adults need just to survive.
That gap is basically the tension at the center of all current research.
It really is. And to understand how we got to this moment in 2026, we have to look at how the whole diagnostic lens has completely flipped.
Like flipped upside down.
Exactly.
Huh.
I mean, we've spent a century trapped in what's called the medical model. That's a model that treated human brain variations like a disease that just needed to be cured.
Right, the old assumption was always that there was a normal brain, and an autistic brain was just a normal brain that had, like, parts missing. Broken parts.
Yeah, a deficit model.
But the neurodiversity movement, which, by the way, has completely reshaped the clinical guidelines, now they argue that this is a flaw in how we even categorize things.
It's a huge flaw.
I keep coming back to this computer analogy from the reading because it bypasses all that heavy medical jargon. Think about it like this. If you buy a Mac and you try to install Windows software on it, the system is going to crash.
Oh, for sure. The error messages are going to pop up immediately.
Right. But the Mac isn't broken. It just runs a completely different operating system.
Exactly. It just processes code differently.
And if you force that Mac to run an emulator program in the background just so it can act like a Windows machine to make everyone else comfortable, you're going to drain the battery. You're going to overheat the processor.
That is such a perfect way to put it, because that emulation layer, that's the biological equivalent of masking.
Which we see heavily in adults today, right?
Oh, heavily. And taking this a step further, the neurodiversity movement argues that human biodiversity operates just like an old-growth forest.
Okay, a forest. Walk me through that.
So a healthy ecosystem requires oak trees and ferns and moss, and all of them extract nutrients and sunlight differently.
Right, they have different jobs.
Exactly. But if you judge a fern by its ability to produce acorns, you completely misunderstand what the fern is designed to do.
Wow. Yeah, you'd think the fern is just a really, really terrible oak tree.
Exactly. Yet it took the psychiatric community an embarrassingly long time to realize they were looking at a fern.
Yeah, it goes way back. Like Eugen Bleuler, he coined the term autism back in 1908, but he used it to describe severe schizophrenia patients.
Right, patients who were withdrawing into their own worlds. He thought it was a psychological retreat, like a symptom of trauma or psychosis.
He totally misunderstood it.
He did, and that fundamental misunderstanding created this diagnostic inertia that lasted for generations. Because the medical community thought it was psychological, they spent decades blaming external factors.
Oh, like blaming mothers.
Yes, notoriously blaming mothers for being too cold or unloving. It was awful. It wasn't until much later that the consensus shifted to recognize, hey, this is a foundational neurodevelopmental trajectory.
Meaning the brain is literally wiring itself differently, like from the second trimester of gestation onward.
Exactly. It's built in from the start.
Which totally explains why the community pushes so hard for identity-first language. The guides we read from autistic advocates are incredibly clear about this.
Yeah, they prefer autistic person rather than person with autism.
Right, because you don't say a person has left-handedness. The wiring dictates how you interact with the physical and social world. It isn't like an accessory you can just detach from your personality.
And that biological reality forces us to look really closely at how this operating system actually shows up in daily life. Today, doctors use a diagnostic framework that organizes these differences into two main buckets.
Okay, let's break down that first bucket. It's called social communication.
Right.
And I love the secret handshake analogy for this because it explains the cognitive load perfectly.
Oh, the secret handshake is a great way to look at it.
So if you're neurotypical, social interaction is basically automated, right? You walk into a room, someone extends a hand, and your brain just automatically calculates the grip, the eye contact, the expected greeting.
All without you consciously dedicating any mental RAM to it.
Exactly. It just happens.
That's because the neurotypical brain has these specialized neural pathways that rapidly process social hierarchies, implied meanings, and body language. It's all running in the background.
But if your brain is running the autistic operating system, you didn't get that specific automated script pre-installed.
You did not.
So you have to manually calculate the handshake. You're consciously observing the angle of the arm. You're estimating how long you're supposed to make eye contact. And you're frantically searching your memory bank for the socially acceptable response to, "How are you?"
And doing manual calculations for something that everyone else does automatically. That takes a massive amount of processing power.
It sounds completely exhausting.
It really is. The cognitive exhaustion is staggering. And for a long time, researchers saw that hesitation or that awkwardness, and they interpreted it as a lack of empathy.
Which is such a damaging stereotype.
It's incredibly damaging. But the 2025 data heavily supports this sociological framework called the double empathy problem. It was originally proposed by a researcher named Damian Milton.
Okay, yeah, this was one of the most compelling parts of the reading for me. It completely dismantles the lack of empathy myth.
It does, because Milton's research showed that the communication breakdown is entirely mutual.
Wait, mutual? Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning a non-autistic person struggles to read the body language and intentions of an autistic person just as much as the reverse.
Oh, wow. So it's not a deficit, it's just a cross-cultural language barrier.
Exactly. It's a mutual language barrier. When two autistic people converse, the flow of information, the mutual understanding, and the empathy markers actually score incredibly high.
That makes so much sense. The friction only happens when the two different operating systems try to interface without a translation program?
Exactly. And that mutual friction bleeds directly into the second diagnostic bucket: repetitive patterns and sensory experiences.
Okay, so if your brain is constantly burning energy trying to manually translate the social world, it makes total biological sense that you would crave intense routine. Like you need predictability to cool the system down.
Right. Predictability is an absolute biological imperative here, especially because the sensory gating system functions differently.
In the bouncer in the brain.
Yes. So in a neurotypical brain, a structure called the thalamus acts like a bouncer at a club. It filters out irrelevant sensory data.
Like the hum of the refrigerator or the tag on your shirt.
Exactly. Or the flicker of a fluorescent light overhead. The bouncer decides, hey, this information isn't important, so it never reaches your conscious awareness.
So in the autistic brain, the bouncer is essentially just letting everyone into the club.
Everyone gets VIP access to the cortex. The hum of the fridge is processed with the exact same intensity as someone speaking directly to your face.
Man, no wonder that's overwhelming.
Right. This completely explains why an unexpected change in routine or just being in a loud, chaotic environment isn't just annoying. It triggers a genuine neurological threat response.
Like a fight or flight reaction.
Exactly. The amygdala fires. The brain literally thinks it's in danger.
And the way the brain regulates that flood of data is through what the medical world calls restricted interests, right? Like a deep, consuming passion for a specific topic.
Yeah, whether that's astrophysics or a specific video game franchise or even something like historical train schedules.
But the word restricted sounds so negative, like it's a deficit.
It's very pejorative. But biologically speaking, engaging in a highly focused, passionate interest creates a predictable, closed feedback loop for the brain.
Oh, I see. It's safe.
It's very safe. It allows the nervous system to flush out stress hormones and return to its baseline. It's a highly effective, natural self-regulation mechanism.
I find it so deeply hypocritical how society frames this, you know? Like, if a non-autistic person spends 80 hours a week hyper-focusing on corporate law, we call them a dedicated partner and we pay them $1 million.
Oh, absolutely. They get an award.
Right. But if an autistic person spends 80 hours a week cataloging insect species because they love it, society labels it a pathological fixation.
It's literally the same neurological mechanism. It's a deep, sustained flow state, but it gets judged entirely differently through our cultural lens.
And that cultural lens is exactly why so many people, especially women and people of color, are completely missed by the diagnostic system until they're adults.
Yeah, because the original diagnostic tools were calibrated using white young boys.
So if a young girl is experiencing this intense sensory flood, but she's been socialized her whole life to be quiet and polite and accommodating.
She's going to pour all of her available cognitive energy into masking.
She's running the Windows emulator we talked about. She studies the neurotypical manual. She suppresses the need to move or stim to regulate her nervous system, and she forces herself to make painful eye contact.
And by doing all that, she completely burns out her processor by her late 20s.
And then the psychiatric system just mislabels that burnout, right?
Usually, yeah. They call it severe depression or bipolar disorder or generalized anxiety. They treat the smoke, but they completely miss the overheating engine.
Let's actually pop the hood on that engine, because the 2025 biological research we looked at is where the narrative really accelerates.
It is wild stuff.
Although I was really surprised to read that the scientific community had to navigate this massive financial roadblock last year. The federal government slashed $80 million from the autism research budget.
Yeah, that 2025 funding cut was a significant contraction in resources. It forced laboratories all around the world to suddenly halt long-term studies and really scale back their teams.
But despite that, the data that did make it to publication is just mind-blowing. Like, for years, I assumed the goal of genetic research was to find the autism gene, but this genomic sequencing totally shatters that idea.
Oh yeah, there is no single smoking gun. The genetics of autism are staggeringly complex, which is why we call it a spectrum of neurodevelopment, not a single condition.
So what are the actual genetic pathways then?
Well, the research divides the genetic origins into two main pathways. First, you have rare de novo mutations.
De novo? Meaning what?
Meaning spontaneous structural changes in the DNA that are not inherited from the parents. They just happen during the initial cellular division.
Okay, so it's like a massive glitch in a printer that randomly just deletes 3 paragraphs of a blueprint.
Exactly. And those significant spontaneous changes are usually correlated with individuals who have much higher support needs. So profound intellectual disabilities or individuals who do not develop spoken language.
Got it. And the second pathway?
The second pathway involves polygenic inheritance.
Okay, so these are the inherited variations. So instead of a deleted paragraph, this is like inheriting a slightly different font style from your mom and a different margin spacing from your dad.
Right. And none of them break the document on their own.
But when you combine hundreds of these tiny, common genetic variations, they cross a threshold.
Yes. They alter the entire architecture of the brain. The AI algorithms used in the 2026 studies analyzed thousands of these genomes and discovered that we aren't looking at one monolith called autism.
We're looking at distinct biological subtypes.
Precisely.
Okay, but how does a slightly different genetic font actually change the physical brain? The Scottish study from 2025 gave a mechanical answer to this, and I want to dive into it because it's fascinating.
The scaffolding study, yes, the Scottish researchers focused on a specific type of cell called radial glia.
Right.
So during fetal development, the brain has to build itself from the inside out. Billions of new neurons are born in the center of the brain, and they have to travel outward to form the complex layers of the cortex.
And they can't just float up and hope they land in the right spot, right?
No, they need a highway system. So the radial glia act as a physical and chemical scaffolding. They stretch out like long ropes, and the newborn neurons literally climb these ropes to reach their designated destination.
Okay, so if the genetic variations alter the chemical signals on those ropes, the neurons migrate differently.
The mapping changes.
Yeah.
Scottish study proved that in autistic brains, this scaffolding process creates a totally different architectural layout.
Which means the wiring is physically different.
Exactly. You often end up with intense local hyperconnectivity. That means the neurons right next to each other are communicating at lightning speed.
Oh, wow.
But you might have weaker long-range connectivity between the distant lobes of the brain.
Wait, that perfectly explains the cognitive profile.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. Because the local hyperconnectivity explains the intense ability to focus on details, right?
Yeah.
Like recognizing complex patterns and mastering specialized subjects.
Yes. And the weaker long-range connectivity explains why integrating multiple streams of chaotic, big-picture information, like, say, a noisy, crowded party with multiple overlapping conversations. Why? That causes the system to crash. The hardware literally dictates the software experience.
That makes so much sense. And importantly, understanding this foundational fetal development completely eradicates that lingering panic over environmental causes during pregnancy.
Oh, yes. The 2025 Global Health Review.
I am so glad that review put a permanent nail in the acetaminophen coffin. There was this viral panic that taking Tylenol during pregnancy caused autism, and it was based on incredibly flimsy correlational data.
It really was. The review proved there is absolutely no biological mechanism for acetaminophen to alter radial glia scaffolding.
It's physically impossible.
Right. The correlation was simply that pregnant people who experience more infections or fevers take more pain relievers. And complex immune responses during gestation have a minor correlation with neurodevelopmental variations.
It was never the medication. So if the architecture is built before birth, and everyone has a uniquely different genetic subtype, how does modern medicine actually provide targeted support?
Well, this brings us to the science fiction chapter of our sources.
The organoids.
The organoids. Precision medicine is arguably the most exciting frontier in neurobiology right now. An organoid is a three-dimensional microscopic tissue culture that mimics the complexity of a real organ.
I have to admit, when I read the methodology for this, my brain struggled to accept it.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
They literally take a standard skin cell from your arm and they somehow reverse engineer it to forget it's a skin cell.
Yes. It utilizes a process involving Yamanaka factors. Those are specific proteins that can reset a mature adult cell back to an embryonic state.
So you basically wipe the cell's hard drive.
Exactly. It becomes an induced pluripotent stem cell. Then you introduce a specific cocktail of growth factors to coax that stem cell into becoming brain tissue.
So you are literally growing a microscopic living model of that specific patient's brain in a petri dish.
Yes. It has their exact genetic profile, their exact scaffolding blueprint.
That is insane. What is the clinical application for that?
It's massive, particularly for co-occurring conditions. About 30% of autistic individuals also experience epilepsy.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that high.
It is. And finding the right seizure medication is historically a nightmare of trial and error. It often comes with devastating side effects.
Because you're basically guessing.
Right. But with a personalized organoid, a neurologist can test 20 different seizure medications on the patient's own tissue in the lab.
Wow.
They can observe the exact electrophysiological response and prescribe the one that works perfectly.
That is the definition of targeted care. You aren't guessing based on a statistical average. You're treating their exact biology.
And the technology isn't just advancing in treatment either. Diagnostics are evolving just as fast, like the AI eye tracking study from 2026.
Oh, yes. So the reliance on subjective behavioral observation is finally being replaced by objective biometric data.
Exactly. Researchers trained an advanced algorithm to analyze the micromovements of a child's eyes. They're called saccades.
And they track this while the kid watches a specialized video, right?
Yeah. And the mechanics of the video are so clever, they show a scene with competing stimuli. So a person is talking and expressing emotion on one side of the screen, while simultaneously a brightly colored toy or balloon is moving on the other side.
And a neurotypical nervous system is biologically programmed to prioritize the social data.
Right. Their eyes will instantly snap to the human face. They'll track the micro-expressions around the eyes and mouth.
But the autistic nervous system processes the physics of the environment with the same or even greater priority as the social data.
Yes. The algorithm measures how long the eyes linger on the reflection of light on the balloon or the predictable trajectory of the moving string.
And because it analyzes this data at a millisecond level, it achieved a 99.78% accuracy rate in identifying the autistic neurophenotype.
99.78%. That level of diagnostic precision means children could be identified as toddlers without enduring months of stressful subjective behavioral evaluations.
I see the clinical value in that. I really do. But honestly, as I read through the feedback from the autistic community, I hit a massive wall of cognitive dissonance.
You mean the gap between the science and the reality?
Yes, we have researchers growing mini brains and training AI to track eye movements to the millisecond. We're mapping out radial glia. But the actual humans living with this operating system are looking at these billion-dollar studies and asking, how does any of this help me survive Tuesday?
That disconnect between academic funding and lived reality is basically the primary focus of the neurodiversity advocacy movement right now. We reviewed the transcripts from the 2025 Autism Conference. the International Society for Autism Research meeting.
And the frustration in those transcripts is just palpable. My takeaway was basically this. If my car engine is smoking on the highway, I don't care about the molecular structure of the steel used to build the engine block. I don't care how the engineers are redesigning the assembly line for next year's model. I need a mechanic to tell me how to cool the radiator right now.
Yes. The advocates are demanding research into quality of life issues that are currently just ignored. Sleep is perhaps the most glaring example.
Sleep is a huge one.
The biological reality is that autistic brains often have a dysregulated melatonin production pathway and totally disrupted circadian rhythms.
And yet, when an autistic adult goes to a doctor and explains they haven't achieved deep REM sleep in 6 months, the doctor shrugs and says, well, that's just part of your autism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the advocates at the conference made a really chilling point about this. Severe, prolonged sleep deprivation is classified as a literal method of torture under international law.
Wow.
But for autistic people, it's just treated as a mild, unsolvable inconvenience.
And the physiological toll of chronic sleep deprivation has to exacerbate every other challenge.
Oh, it does. It increases sensory sensitivity, it destroys executive function, and it accelerates the severe burnout we discussed earlier. But there is virtually no funding dedicated to targeted pharmacological or environmental sleep interventions for autistic neurology.
The lack of research into physical co-occurring conditions is equally frustrating. The sources highlighted a massive overlap between autism and connective tissue disorders, specifically Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Right, because the connective tissue matrix in the body is built using genetic instructions that overlap heavily with neurodevelopmental pathways. People with Ehlers-Danlos have hypermobile joints, which leads to chronic dislocations, severe pain, and deep fatigue.
It's not just a party trick where you can bend your thumb backward, it's chronic daily pain.
Exactly.
And the community is also begging for research into the gut-brain axis because severe gastrointestinal distress is incredibly common.
And furthermore, the hormonal research is essentially non-existent. Autistic individuals who menstruate report debilitating responses to standard hormonal fluctuations. It leads to PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder.
Right, because the nervous system is already processing the world at maximum capacity. When you introduce a systemic hormonal shift, the sensory filtering completely collapses.
But instead of funding research into how to stabilize that hormonal cascade, the grant money goes toward growing another batch of organoids to study fetal origins.
It's so backwards. And the non-speaking community is facing an entirely different kind of systemic neglect.
Oh, absolutely. The historical medical approach to non-speaking autistic individuals has been exclusively focused on forcing verbal speech.
Right. Therapists use behavioral conditioning to coerce the individual into mimicking verbal sounds. Often, they withhold preferred items until compliance is achieved.
But the community is aggressively pointing out that an inability to speak is not an inability to think.
Say that again, because that's huge.
An inability to speak is not an inability to think. The issue is often apraxia.
Apraxia. What is that mechanically?
It's a disconnect in the motor planning required to make the mouth and vocal cords form the words. The brain knows exactly what it wants to say, but the physical hardware of the mouth won't execute the command.
So they're trapped, which is why the push for AAC augmentative and alternative communication is so critical.
Yes. The advocates are demanding that researchers stop treating oral speech as the ultimate goal and start investing in robust text-to-speech tablets, advanced eye-tracking keyboards, and sign language integration.
Because communication is a fundamental human right. Oral speech is just one specific modality of communication.
Exactly. If you give a non-speaking child a robust AAC tablet, you aren't giving up on them. You're giving them the keys to the world.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most important paradigm shift in our deep dive today. If we accept the science that this is a foundational, unchangeable operating system,
Right.
and we hear the community demanding practical daily support, how do our institutions actually pivot?
Well, the clinical shift is moving from compliance-based therapy to what is known as neurodiversity-affirming care.
And the core philosophy there is profound but really simple, right?
Extremely simple. You alter the environment to accommodate the person, rather than traumatizing the person to fit the environment.
Let's look at how this changes early childhood intervention. Under the old compliance model, a therapist might force an autistic child to make eye contact before handing over a toy, or physically hold the child's hands down to stop them from flapping.
Right. And we know now from the biological data that forcing eye contact actually triggers an amygdala fear response. in many autistic brains.
And hand flapping is a vital self-regulation tool.
Exactly. Suppressing those behaviors doesn't make the child less autistic. It just teaches them that their natural physiological responses are wrong and that their bodily autonomy does not matter.
Affirming care completely dismantles that. Therapists are now using play-based child-led models. Like if the child's preferred method of play is organizing blocks by the spectrum of visible light rather than building a tower, the therapist sits down and helps organize the colors.
Right. You build a neural bridge through intrinsic motivation. You connect with them inside their operating system rather than demanding they emulate yours.
And the language we use shapes that reality. The advocacy guides really emphasize reframing our entire vocabulary.
It's so important.
When an autistic person requires deep detail before starting a project, they aren't being rigid, they are being thorough.
Yes. And when a child is melting down in a grocery store, they aren't manipulative or attention-seeking. They are dysregulated and seeking connection to survive a sensory assault.
The behavioral output is identical, but the adult's interpretation shifts from judgment to empathy.
Exactly. And that exact same environmental reframing is finally, thankfully, beginning to infiltrate the corporate world.
And it's about time, because the traditional modern workplace is essentially a torture chamber for the neurodivergent operating system.
Oh, it really is. Bright fluorescent lights, chaotic open-plan seating, unwritten social politics, and vague communication.
But companies are realizing that if they optimize the environment, they unlock a massive competitive advantage.
Because the deep passions we discussed earlier translate into unparalleled professional expertise.
Right.
The local hyperconnectivity in the brain allows for lateral thinking and pattern recognition that neurotypical teams just often miss entirely.
And unlocking that potential requires incredibly simple accommodations. It means offering noise-canceling headphones without making it a bureaucratic HR nightmare.
Yes.
It means allowing asynchronous communication, letting people work via clear, direct text documents rather than forcing them into exhausting, performative Zoom meetings.
It also requires management to abandon the secret handshake?
If an employer needs a project submitted on Wednesday, they must explicitly state, submit this by Wednesday at 5 p.m.
Right. They can't just say, let's aim to wrap this up midweek.
No, because the autistic employee will waste precious cognitive energy trying to decipher the unwritten meaning of midweek. And the beautiful irony here is that when a company implements clear communication, sensory-friendly spaces, and flexible hours to accommodate their autistic staff, the neurotypical employees suddenly report massive increases in their own job satisfaction.
Because good accessible design is just good human design.
Exactly. But the only way we achieve that design, whether in the workplace, the clinic, or the research lab, is by surrendering control to the experts.
And the experts are the people living the experience.
The rallying cry of the neurodiversity movement is plastered across every single resource we reviewed. Nothing about us without us.
It is an absolute mandate. The era of neurotypical scientists and doctors observing autistic people through a one-way mirror and dictating their care is over.
It has to be.
Autistic individuals must be the lead researchers directing the grant money. They must be the policymakers designing the workplace accommodations. They must be the therapists shaping early childhood care.
We started this deep dive talking about the expectation of medical precision, right?
True.
Desire to find the broken bone on the X-ray and fix it. We've seen how the complex genetic scaffolding and the reality of the autistic operating system make that X-ray machine completely obsolete. We aren't dealing with broken hardware. We are looking at a deeply specialized, highly sensitive variation of the human mind.
It challenges us to stop trying to pave over the forest and instead learn how to cultivate the soil so every variation can thrive.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. As our society becomes increasingly reliant on complex data, systemic problem solving, and deep specialized technological focus, what if the autistic brain isn't just a natural variation?
What do you mean?
What if the capacity for intense hyperfocus, the ability to see patterns others miss, and the drive to prioritize objective truth over social hierarchy is actually a vital evolutionary advantage required for the next stage of human progress?
Well, that certainly reframes who should be accommodating whom.
Thanks for coming along on this deep dive with us. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and see you on the next dive.